Okay, we are now chapter 12 of Genesis. And before we get there, I made some corrections. I recalculated the numbers from the last genealogy, and I added in there Abraham's date of birth and death. And I was shocked to see that Shem was alive when Abraham died. He had another 30 years to go before Abraham died. And Eber too. Shem and Eber were the longest living of them. And even though Abraham lived 175 years, if again, we're just going with the genealogy, if there's skip things in there, whatever, but if you just calculate the genealogy, Noah was 60 years old, had 60 more years to live when Abraham was born. So when Abraham was 60, Noah was still alive.
Wow.
I mean, just reflect upon that for a second. And you just kind of go through the lists, like, when someone lives 950 years, that's a long time. That's a long time to live.
I know.
And same thing with Shem living 600 years. And that to me was a surprise. I was shocked to see that Shem and Eber actually were still on the earth when Abraham died. And that's just stunning. But there you go. And that's why you can understand why they're called the Semites and the Hebrews, because they're clearly the prominent fathers in this genealogy here. So anyway, that's just a little, take it for what it's worth, but I thought that was really crazy. And especially to discover that Noah was still hanging around and all those things were happening with Abraham. But all right.
Yeah, if I could just ask one question. Yeah, throughout scripture, when it talks, like when they fold the flag, for example, they talk about the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob.
Yeah.
Noah came before that. It's still the same God. Do you know what I mean?
Actually, it's really interesting. After the flood, God is referred to as the God of Shem.
Right.
And so he's the identifying marker there. It's the first time when we have that distinction where you now have three brothers in all the nations, and it's like identifying the true God is the God of Shem. So he's never referred to as the God of Adam, because that's the God of all people. But when we start having to distinguish the lines, if you're going to find God, you need to have sort of that point person. And the first point person we're given is in Genesis, I believe 9, when he curses Canaan and says, "Blessed be the God of Shem." And so then we have the God of Shem, and then he will be known that way until you get to Abraham, when he's now going to be the God of Abraham, and then Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and then the God of Israel, and then ultimately, of course, it will be the God of and Father of our Lord Jesus Christ.
Right. And even though Shem was a son of Noah, it's still the God of Shem as opposed to the God of Noah, huh?
Yeah, he is definitely the God of Noah, and he's the God of all people. But the idea is that with the new humanity now, we have these three lines of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and it's going to be through Shem that you're going to know God.
Oh, okay.
God will be known through him.
Wow. Okay. Thank you.
So, yeah, great question. So, hey, welcome back, Liz. Good to see you.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I had a funeral today, and I just got back from the funeral, so it's like one of those busy days. But I'm glad.
Oh, you too, Liz. But I was talking about the other Liz coming on here, Liz.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay,
I'm
sorry. That's right. She says I'm Elizabeth. I'm sorry.
The world doesn't revolve around you, Elizabeth.
I know.
We have our quarters of Bob and Elizabeth in this Bible study here. So
that's true. Yeah, and you always called me Elizabeth. I don't know what I was thinking.
All right.
Oh man. Oh goodness.
Welcome back. Liz, we just mentioned before you came on that with the corrected genealogy here, calculating the dates, we discovered that Noah was still alive when Abraham was born. In fact, Abraham was 60 years old when Noah finally died. So it's amazing how that is. So anyway, I think you're muted there. All right, so we're picking up Genesis 12. Now really this is the new section now of Genesis. You can think of Genesis falling into two major sections. Genesis 1 to 11 is sometimes called the prehistory, kind of laying down the foundation, sort of setting the context, and the real story now begins. The story of salvation really begins in Genesis 12, when God interacts with Noah and the Lord establishes his covenant with I'm sorry, not Noah, with Abram. And now we have the story of Abraham. And I want to say, as we go through the story of Abraham, I have a few, as you know, a few things to help you kind of navigate the story, to interpret it properly. First off, Abraham is referred to as the father of what for us?
Believers, faith.
Yeah, he's the father of faith. Abraham is the first. He, you know, there were people with faith before him, but Abraham really is set up for us as an example of faith for us. So when you read Abraham's story, you're going to be thinking about faith. That's what we're really learning about faith as we're watching him. And he is presented to us as sort of the example of faith. So in the stories, you're not going to see the kind of scandals you might see in other stories, though you might think you're seeing some scandalous things. They're really not as scandalous as they seem. And I'm going to make a full-throated defense of Abraham in some of these stories, because he really is set up as a model for us. Second is that, hang on a second, that in Abraham's story, you're going to see the faithfulness of God in the stories. So these are not moral tales saying that, making judgments, saying, you know, Abraham does good, Abraham does bad. It's really that Abraham in every story believes, and there's a model of faith for us to follow. And God also in every story with Abraham is faithful to his promises. And we're going to see that played out. And if we get to it, I think we'll probably get into it today. We'll see. The second part of Genesis 12, you have this story of Abram and Sarah in Egypt. And I'll tell you right off the top, I'm going to be defending Abraham in this. I think he gets a bad rap in the story, but we'll get to that in a moment. So, but let's start with the beginning here, verses 1 to 3, the covenant with Abraham. So, Bob Thomas, would you read that for us? Genesis 12. I'll make it a little bit bigger for you.
That's good.
Of course, I keep losing my place. There we go. Okay.
Okay. Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you, and I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you, I will curse. And if you all the families, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed.
Great. The very important passage. This is the covenant. This is the first. It gets more officially later on in Genesis 15 and 17, but we'll start here. So this is the first mention, sort of the covenant with Abraham, or with Abram. And we have here, I would say, two parts to it. First is the command of God. What is the command that he gives to Abraham?
To leave everything and go where I tell you to go.
Yeah, go. From your country and your kindred and your father's house. So you're right. Leave your family and home and go to where?
And that I'll show you.
Yeah, the land that I will show you.
Mm.
And that, of course, what land is that?
Canaan.
Yeah, that's Canaan land. But so that right there, it's a command of faith. You're going to be leaving that which you know, your family, your home, that's hugely important.
Familiar. Mm.
Yeah, everything familiar, and you're going to go to a strange land. That I'm going to show you. Okay, and then there is the promise that he makes him, and we always want to keep this promise in mind, because the stories now they're going to play out are going to show how God is faithful to the promises he makes, and how Abraham is always believing the promises of God. So what's the promise he gives him?
He'll make you a blessing.
Yeah, let me break it down to
Great nation.
right. Let's try this. There we go. Oh,
Uh-oh.
I don't know why it does this. I don't know if you guys know computers at all, but it just seems to give me grief here. So let me try it.
Just tab in one more.
Yeah, and I have to do it a different way. I've got to do it with this tab right there. Okay, there we go. All right, so the promise is we'll call them the promises. And the first one was what?
A great nation.
Yeah, I will make of you a great nation.
Nation.
Okay. Remember at this point, it's Abraham, I believe, is I think 75 at this point.
Mm.
And Sarah is 65. They have no children. And the promise is I'm going to make you a great nation. And then what else does he say?
You bless them.
Bless you. And
Those who bless you.
before that,
Make a great name.
make your name great. And that's so that you will be a blessing.
Mm.
Okay. And then with that blessing, I will bless those.
Who bless you.
Bless those who bless you. And curse those
Who curse you.
curse you. And the next thing is you
All the
all the
people.
families
Will be blessed.
of the earth will be blessed through you. That's the very first word he gives. So it's calling us back to Genesis 11 with the Table of Nations, the beginning of the Table of Nations. If you remember the Tower of Babel, and why did they build that tower in Babel? What was that about?
To make themselves a great nation.
Yeah, they said, let us build a tower and make a name for ourselves, which is
Mm.
really interesting. They make a name for themselves and they're building a tower to heaven. And they're not scattering like what as the Lord told them to do, to spread out. They're consolidating, they're coming together to build something to the sky. And that's not how this goes. Their flow is, together and then up. And God's like, no, that's not how it goes. It goes from me first and then you spread out. So they're reversing. That's the evil of Babel. Here you'll notice God takes Abram and the first thing he has him do is leave, spread, get out of there. And that through that, all the nations will be blessed. You can see the movement is now away. Whereas for the movement of Babel was to come inward together, staying together out of fear. And the way of faith is the opposite of that, he sends him away from his family, going out, spreading forth, ultimately to bless all the nations that he just scattered and cursed.
How far did he have to travel?
Oh, a long way. Directly it's across the desert, but you have to go up the river but now when God speaks to him, he's in Haran. So from Haran, which is just north of Israel, it's still a good ways, but it's not like coming from Ur. Ur was a long distance.
Mm.
The river. So we'll have to get a map and show that.
Ur was south, and it's like they went up to the top where Haran was, and then back down to Canaan, kind of on the other, kind of more parallel to Ur, but they went up and around.
Yeah, if you look at this map here, Ur is down, I believe it's over on here.
Yeah.
Ur is, and then they would have gone up along the river. This is the Fertile Crescent. They were going all this way, and Haran is right about here.
Yeah.
And then he would have just gone down into Canaan from there. So this last leg of the trip is not so bad. It's a decent ways, but the more part about it is that the people that he's going amongst are really wicked people. They're not. These are the tribes. If you remember when Moses brings the people of Israel, they're terrified to go into the land of Canaan. I mean, the giants in the land. They are the Nephilim. There's a corruption there. This is where Sodom and Gomorrah is. All just these vile, wicked cities in the land of Canaan. So he's dealing with people that are terrifying. I mean, these are not, they're not the friendly types here, which is going to explain what happens in the next scene. All right, so the promise he makes, we want to keep those promises in mind. You can kind of break it down. He starts with a great nation, the blessing, and then he's going to make his name great, and all the families will be blessed. So there's this great nation, the blessing, and then later on, it's not said in the promise, but he gives them sort of implied the land. And so so keep that in mind. Sort of the threefold promise to Abraham is, let me pull it up again, is a nation or descendants. He promises him a family, a great family, blessing, and the land. That's sort of the threefold promise. And Abraham, as we're going to see, is set up. He is a model, a small scale of what God is promising to all who belong to Christ, to the church, to us. That just as he promised Abraham that he would make him a great nation, and all the families we've blessed through him, through Christ, we become God's family. Just like Abraham becomes the father of many, the promise we're given is we're brought into the family of God. The blessing that Abraham will receive, you're going to see a temporal blessing where God is constantly blessing him, taking care of him, providing for him. But we will be far greater blessed. Ours are eternal blessings. And he gives him a small plot of land in the Middle East, a nation for himself to possess. But for us, we inherit the entire earth. All the land will be ours. So it's like a little, God just takes Abram and says, this is a shadow of what is coming. It's a shadow. So when Abraham is presented, it's like looking at a shadow. You don't see the fullness of it, but you see the form of it. You can get a general gist of what it will be, but the fullness is coming later on with Christ when all the nations will be blessed through him. So this is the covenant. But we want to remember these promises because with each story, we're going to see how it plays out. So let's take a look at our first story when Abraham leaves there, and verses 4 to 9. Claudette, would you read that for us?
Sure. So Abram went as the Lord had told him, and Lot went with him. Abram was 75 years old when he departed from Haran. And Abram took Sarai his wife, and Lot his brother's son, and all their possessions that they had gathered, and the people that they had acquired in Haran. And they set out to go to the land of Canaan. When they came to the land of Canaan, Abram passed through the land to the place at Shechem, to the oak of Moriah. At that time, the Canaanites were in the land. And the Lord appeared to Abram and said, to your offspring, I will give this land. So he built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. From there, he moved to the hill country on the east of Bethel and pitched his tent, with Bethel on the west and Ai on the east. And there he built an altar to the Lord and called upon the name of the Lord. And Abram journeyed on, still going toward the Negeb.
Okay. All right, let's go through what happens here. So let's get some details on Abram at the beginning. So this is the start here. When Abram leaves Haran, what do we learn about him?
75.
Okay, we'll start with that. He's 75 years old. Okay.
He takes Lot, sorry.
Okay, he takes Sarai, his wife, and Lot. Who is Lot?
His
Nephew.
brother's son, or his nephew.
His nephew. Okay. Why does he take Lot with him? What's that about?
Well-
Haran died, his brother.
Yeah. Remember, Haran is the brother of Abram, and he had died. And Terah, remember, Terah goes and settles in Haran, and we assume he names it after his son.
Mhm.
And so Lot becomes like the son of Abraham. And so that's why he's not just a nephew, he is like a son to Abram. That's why there's such a very deep concern that Abram will always have for Lot. And what else they take? They take all their possessions, as well as
People they acquired.
we'll call them the servants they acquired in Haran, and they set out to the land of Canaan. All right, so now we have when Abram arrives in Canaan, what happens there?
Canaanites were there.
Yeah, so the Canaanites are there. As this is again, this is why this is a fearful story, because it's not like when we had the people to settling the plains where there's just kind of empty open land. I mean, there's some Indians here and there, and they have certain territories, but a lot of the territories are kind of open country, and just kind of go and pick a spot and you settle and you build there. It's like people are living in the land here.
Mm.
And people, they have cities in this land, and the Canaanites are there. And this is it's set in kind of an ominous tone here. The Canaanites were in the land, and there were, if you remember, there were many tribes of them. And this is a very desirable place to live. If you look at the map, it's like in the middle of the world. Everything goes through this area. You've got the sea, the Mediterranean Sea on one side. You got the Fertile Crescent goes through there. If you want to travel from the great empires of the kingdoms of Babylon or Assyria to Egypt, you have to go through this area. Everything travels through. It's a major commerce area, and the Canaanites possessed the land at the time. And then when he arrives, what happens next? Verse 7.
The Lord appears to him.
So the Lord appeared to Abram. So that's interesting. Even that phrase, what does that look like?
I think he sees him face to face.
Yeah, it's not a dream
Hmm.
or a vision that he has. The Lord appears to him, and the idea is it's some kind of physical manifestation. Now, what are some of the ways that the Lord appeared physically to people in the Old Testament?
Angels.
Sometimes the angel of the Lord. The Lord is comes as like an angel of the Lord,
The burning bush,
like a burning bush, like an angel.
a still small whisper.
Whisper, yeah. Still small voice.
Still small voice, I mean, yeah.
But one of the ways you see him later on appearing to Abram is what? Do you remember how he appears to Abram a little bit later on?
He come as a man, or the visitor, the traveler.
Yeah, he comes as a man, even to him. We see that. Remember, the three men come to him
Mhm.
in a physical. So when the Lord is appearing to Abraham, it's in a convincing manner. It's not something that is misinterpreted. And so when the Lord appears to Abram, he's not necessarily hearing voices. He's not a madman, but he comes in a physical form, and engages with him and speaks to him. And he says, and in that form, he says to him, what's the promise he gives to him?
Going to give the land to his offspring.
Yeah, this is the land. Basically, maybe we told him, go to the land I will show you. Well, he
Mhm.
goes, he said, this is the land that I will give to your offspring. Okay. Abraham's response is to what?
Builds an altar.
Mhm.
You always have to praise the Lord and thank him.
Absolutely. He built there an altar to the Lord who had appeared to him. And by the way, where was this? Where did this happen?
Yeah.
Shechem.
Was it Bethel?
Uh,
Shechem.
no, it's at Shechem.
Shechem.
At Shechem, at the Oak of Morah. Now, it's really interesting. It's a tree. And trees are a big deal in the trees and mountains are a really big deal in the Old Testament. What does that remind us of, trees and mountains?
Mount of Olives?
There's Mount of Olives. There you go. There's Mount of Olives up there. There's another mountain with trees. But the very beginning in Genesis is
Sinai. Sinai and the burning bush.
oh, there's another tree in a mountain, but we haven't gotten to that yet. What have we seen already? That's been a tree and a mountain.
Well, Noah, when the floods cleared, wasn't he up on top of a mountain?
No, it wasn't a mountain, and there he plants a vineyard. And if you go back even further, it's Genesis 3. It's the Garden of Eden, Genesis 2. The Garden of Eden was a mountain, as well as, and of course, there's trees there, and two particular trees that are noteworthy. So there's something really special about trees and mountains. So it shouldn't shock you that when God determines to save, it's on a mountain with a tree that he does it. But here we have, again, he builds an altar at Shechem at the Oak of Morah. And this is why, if you remember when we talked about the Samaritan woman in Genesis 4 and John 4, she says that my people, the Samaritans, say that we should worship God on this mountain. You Jews say that we should worship in the mountain of Jerusalem. This is the mountain at Shechem that they saw as sacred, because this is where Abram built the first altar. The very first altar in the promised land was at Shechem. And that's why the Samaritans, the northern tribes, said that Shechem is the holy site. This is where God wants to worship him, because that's where Abraham worshiped him at the very first time. Interesting case they make.
Mm.
So, and in fact, that I mentioned before, but they still worship there. The Samaritans are still around. And they actually have a temple, and they have their own little, on that mountain, they still do their sacrifices there even. So, all right, that's Abram's response. And then from there, what happens next? He
Keeps going.
Hmm.
Keeps trucking.
on the east of Bethel, he moves. Okay, so Abram moves to the hill country. What it is? On the east of Bethel. And pitched his tent there with Bethel on the east, west, and Ai in the east. And again, what happens there? And he builds another altar to the Lord and calls upon the name of the Lord. So right there, from the very beginning, you see the immediate response of the man of faith who's given the promises is he builds an altar to the Lord, not one, but two, each place he goes, and calls upon the name of the Lord. So we're noting that well. Now he goes on toward the Negev. So any question about that? So we kind of get him into the land now. He's moved around. And now we come to a very interesting story here. Let's take a look at that. Okay.
I have just a side question. So
please.
even in different places, and like particularly with the kings, they always would go and worship on the high places, and it's always referred to as the high places. Is that because that's supposed to be like a representation or a depiction of us closer to God when we're on a high place?
Yeah. It's that was everyone kind of understood that it's, you meet with God in high places. That's how you travel up to mountains, and God ordains that. Abraham goes up to a high place to sacrifice Isaac to the Lord, if you remember. And they build the temple in a high place. The problem with the high places that the kings were going up to was God, at that point, God had said, there's only one high place that you're going to seek me. And that's, at that point, it was in Jerusalem, and they were going up to other ones, sometimes sacrificing to other gods. But God intends there's sort of one high place where we all gather together to meet. And then the location became very important specifically. But yeah, that's it all kind of getting back to Eden. It's kind of like seeking the Lord and crying out to him. And there's something about that. When you think about the mountains and such, it's like you're leaving behind your everyday life. You can't live up on top of these mountains. You're leaving behind your farms, your homes, and you're going up to a place to meet with God. There's something very significant about it. Again, which is why our church particularly, is such a high sanctuary that you have to climb these monstrous stairs to get to worship. They did that intentionally. I mean, that wasn't for practical reasons. That was because they wanted the sanctuary to be in a high place. And so, and then sometimes even further, if you go to these churches where they have these high pulpits,
Mhm.
have you seen those where you got to climb like
Yes.
spiral staircase to get up to the pulpit? It's
Mhm.
all emphasizing that. So yeah, great question. All right, let's pick it up from here. Liz, would you get that for us? Verses 10 to 16.
Okay. Now there was a famine in the land, so Abram went down to Egypt to sojourn there, for the famine was severe in the land. When he was about to enter Egypt, he said to Sarai, his wife, I know that you're a woman beautiful in appearance, and when the Egyptians see you, they will say, this is his wife. Then they will kill me, but they will let you live. Say you are my sister, that it may go well with me because of you, and that my life may be spared for your sake. When Abram entered Egypt, the Egyptians saw that the woman was very beautiful. And when the princes of Pharaoh saw her, they praised her to Pharaoh, and the woman was taken into Pharaoh's house. And for her sake, he dealt well with Abram, and he had sheep, oxen, male donkeys, male servants, female donkeys, and camels.
Okay. All right. Now, this is the story that Abraham gets bashed on all the time for this one, that he's a coward, he's hiding behind his wife. He's afraid of getting killed. So he says, let's lie to the Egyptians, deceive them, and then gets him into trouble. And see, there's a lesson, kids. Don't be like Abraham like this. But I'm going to give a little defense of him because I want to add a little context to what's going on here. So first we'll start with the situation. What's going on in verse 10 that's causing this situation to happen?
Famine.
Okay, there's a famine in the land. And with that, Abraham does something interesting. What's curious is not so much what he does, but what he doesn't do when there's a famine in the land of Canaan.
Doesn't turn to God.
Well, it doesn't, not necessarily, but I mean, there's something that he would have a person like Abram, who wasn't a man of faith, would have done this instead of going to Egypt. If there's a famine in the land and you can't live there anymore, where are you going to go?
Back towards family.
Yeah, he doesn't go back to Haran. That's normally what you would have done. He has family there still. And instead of, he refuses, he never goes back that way. In fact, he needs to get a wife for Isaac, and he sends his servant to go get it. He doesn't want Isaac to go back there. There's a sense of he's not going back to Haran. And instead, to survive, he goes further away into Egypt. All right. Now, when they're about to enter, he has a plan. And I want to talk about that, of what's going on here with that. So, and why I say this is not, I don't think this is, I don't think we're intended to look upon this as some great sin on Abraham's part, because it says later on that he did this everywhere he went. He did this. This is not the only time he does this. He does it again later on, gets caught for it too. But it says that he did this everywhere he went. Whenever he went into a new place, he told people that Sarah was his sister. Okay.
It's true.
And it was
true.
true, right? But there's a reason for it. And we have to remember this, that first off is that Abram is traveling in hostile areas. And And one of the things is, notice he says, what's his fear that's going to happen? If I say you're my wife, what are they going to do?
Kill me so
Kill
I
me.
should have you.
They're going to kill me.
Yeah.
And they're going to let you live. And the reason that is that, and this is something my Hebrew professor really kind of laid out. He was a big defender of Abraham's in this. And I agree with him. He said that time, the way things worked was that if you have a couple with no kids, they have no children, and if the husband dies, all the property goes to the wife. And so it's very tempting in that situation to, in a hostile area where you're traveling as a stranger, you have no protectors, there's no one defending you, that somebody might see that and say, I want all the goods that he has. And remember, Abraham's traveling wealthy. He's traveling with lots of stuff and servants. And so the idea is, I'll come along and say, I want all that. And so I'll plot to have Abram killed. I could do it myself or even just hire somebody to do it. And then Sarah has no protectors. I can just take her for myself, but mainly because I want all the stuff. If I get Sarah, then I get everything. That I think is why Sarah is so attractive. The word beautiful is same word as attractive or good, something appealing. Doesn't mean that she is this gorgeous woman. She's 65 years old. You know, if some guy is looking for a beautiful, hot lady, he's not looking to a 65-year-old, and she can't even have kids.
What's wrong with that?
Nothing wrong with it.
I knew you were gonna say that.
But if he's looking to get rich, this is the way to go. Abraham is really vulnerable because he has no sons that would inherit anything. It would go to his wife. And so basically, this is what makes her so appealing to others. Now, if he says, you're my sister, that changes the ball game. Because now, if they actually want Sarah, they won't get anything with her.
You need to treat Abraham well too.
And they have to get permission from him to marry her. They did honor that. And then if he dies and she's the sister, she doesn't get anything. All of the wealth would go to his servants, not to her. It's his wife. If someone takes in his wife, it just gives her a different position. So saying she's my sister kind of protects them both, and it works. And so in one sense, is he deceiving them? You would say, yes, he is. Even though it's half true, he is deceiving them. But I would say it's not the kind of sin that you think it is. It would be like walking in Nazi Germany with your cousin who's Jewish, and you tell that person, you tell everybody that, you're my sister, or you're not Jewish, basically. They know I'm not Jewish, so you just tell them you're my sister, even though you're just my friend, so that everyone will think you're a Gentile, and that will save both our lives, basically. We could see ourselves doing that. That's not an act of cowardice. You don't say, I trust God so much, I'm going to tell the Nazis you're a Jew and trust that I'm going to tell the truth to the Nazis and God will protect you. I'm like, no, in hostile times like this, this is not considered, this act, a breach of faith or wickedness or unbelief. It's Abraham realizing the danger that he and his wife are in and framing a story to keep them both as safe as possible. That's the gist of it here. And the reason why I don't believe this to be an act of sin is because he continually does this again and again.
Well,
And God, yeah, go ahead.
he's also protecting the people that he's brought with him too then, because if they killed him and took her, then all these other people belong to those other person as well.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's his sister, like you said, all the stuff goes to the servants.
Yeah, he's making the best of a bad situation here. So really the story is not a moral tale of Abram's failing here, and we shouldn't be like this. That's not what this is about. Because again, he keeps doing this again and again. God never rebukes him for it. In fact, you'll see God will deliver him. And the fact is, it works all the time with one exception, which is an unthinkable exception. And that exception is if the king, who is above the law and the code, they had a real strict code about certain things, decides that he wants your wife, there's nothing you can do about it. If he wants to take her. And that's exactly what happens here, as we'll see in a minute. The Egyptians saw that the woman's beautiful and they praise her to Pharaoh. You know, that's such a bizarre situation. Pharaoh's motivation for taking Sarah, though, what's his motivation for doing this? He clearly is not going to get any children from her. Why does he do this? Why does a king add princesses? Why does he take wives to himself?
Status.
Status is one.
Oh, for all his servants and his livestock.
He's going to give Abram, he's going to treat Abram very well as he takes Sarah. But you know why would a pharaoh, why would a king take wives, take all these extra wives? He doesn't need them.
For
Why does he do it?
political reasons.
It's political reasons, yeah.
Oh,
But at this point, Abram comes there. He's an impressive man with an impressive entourage. He doesn't have a home, but God has been blessing him. And he's got this sister coming in there with him. And so Pharaoh wants an alliance of some sort with Abram. You know, Abram's coming from the land of Canaan, and he's traveling there. He's clearly sees him as a man of influence, someone with a future in the land of Canaan. And it would make sense for Pharaoh to strike up a political alliance. And oh, how great this is. Abram's got a sister. And she's worthy to come into the palace. Let's take her. And we'll treat Abram well. And so the unthinkable happens in the scene here. Who would have thought that Pharaoh, of all people, would want to take Sarah? You know, that's the only breach in the plan. That's why the only time this plan doesn't work is when a king steps in, which is why it happens. There's another time later on with, I think, Abimelech, the king, does the same thing that Pharaoh does. So, but there's something more why this story is really important. Let's talk about what happens here. So he's traveling hostile areas. Okay, so Pharaoh takes Sarai, and gives and treats Abram well, gives him lots of stuff. Right. This is a problem, isn't it? I can't hear you, Liz. Sorry.
You don't know what the king's going to do behind closed curtains.
Well, it's a problem. I mean, he's going to treat her well. He's certainly going to treat her well, because if he doesn't, that's going to make enemies of Abram. He's certainly going to treat her well. But what's the bigger issue here? What's really at stake?
It's Abram's wife.
Yes. Yes, this is the first test of God's promise. Remember, God's first promise was, I'm going to make a great nation out of you, right? Can't do that without a woman, you know? And so now it's like this is the first test of it. And Pharaoh, as we'll find out, is, you know, we talked about that son of the woman versus the son of the serpent and the strike here. So there's a strike now. It's like, this is not just Pharaoh. Why would this happen? You would suggest that there are spiritual elements at work here. There are powers behind the scenes moving these pieces to take place. There's no reason why this should happen, except that it does. And so we have this first test of God's promise.
And also the first of visible of Satan putting his fingers into things and trying to destroy God's plan of redemption.
Yes. Now look at the full test that's been given here. God promised Abram, what were the three things?
A nation,
Great nation,
Land and
a good name,
land, and the
a good
blessing.
name and descendants.
Okay. So now here's the test, right? First off, there's a famine, and famines are not blessings. They are curses. Secondly, Abram leaves the land. That's what he was promised, right? And
Mm.
thirdly, Abram loses his
Right.
wife, which means everything's at stake here. The land has been lost. His family has been lost. He is cursed. I mean, this is a real test of the full test of that promise that God gave him. And so the question is, what's going to happen next? Because there is nothing Abram can do to settle the score that can satisfy this. There's nothing he can do. You cannot overpower or overcome.
King.
He's the king of the world right now.
Mm.
So what do we do? Let's take a look. Let's see, where we leave off here. Elizabeth, would you read the next, finish up 17 to 20?
Sure. But the Lord afflicted Pharaoh and his house with great plagues because of Sarai, Abram's wife. So Pharaoh called Abram and said, "What is this you have done to me? Why did you not tell me that she was your wife? Why did you say she is my sister, so that I took her for my wife? Now then, here is your wife, take her and go." And Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away with his wife and all that he had.
Okay. All right. This is the Lord's faithfulness now, how he's going to bring about. Now look carefully at some of the details in salvation. What happens next?
He afflicts the Pharaoh and family.
Okay, so the Lord afflicts Pharaoh and his house
His house,
with great plagues.
legs.
Okay. Pharaoh not happy about this.
Mm.
Pharaoh is furious, and what does he do?
Gave Sarah back to Abram and said, "Go, get out of here."
Sends Abram and Sarai away, basically
Right.
back to the promised land, back to the land of Canaan.
Mm.
And by the way, with lots of extra goods. Remember all that stuff that Pharaoh gave Abram, all the oxen, sheep, male donkeys, and servants and everything.
Mm.
Now they're sending them all away. And then Pharaoh gave men orders concerning him, and they sent him away. Basically, what does that mean? He gave men orders concerning him.
Leave him alone.
Basically, yeah. Pharaoh basically gives Abram safe passage. Because now it's known he is his wife, and so I know you people. I know how you are. Don't you dare touch this man. So now, does this story sound familiar to you? There's a famine in the land, and God's chosen family leaves the land of Canaan to go to Egypt, where they are basically held hostage. And then the Lord sends plagues on Egypt, and the people are driven from the land to go back to the land of Canaan. I don't know. Does that ring a bell to you guys here?
Yeah, Moses.
Yes, this is
Mm.
a prequel. This is a preview of what's about to happen.
Joseph and his family,
Yeah,
Jacob and his sons.
exactly right. It was a famine that brought them in the land of Egypt to begin with, if you remember, in the time of Joseph. And then, of course, it's through plagues that God will afflict the house of Egypt, and Pharaoh will drive them out, and they end up going back to the land of Canaan. So it's a powerful preview of the way the Lord
Mm.
saved.
Mm.
And you
I have
see it. Yeah, go ahead.
I have a quick question. So I can understand the Lord afflicted the Pharaoh and his house with a great plague because of Sarah, but actually Abram told the Pharaoh that Sarah was his sister.
Yeah.
So, but it's like Pharaoh's being blamed just for believing Abram. Does that make sense? I mean, nothing makes sense. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Pharaoh is being punished for being Pharaoh.
Okay. Oh, okay.
Wrong place, wrong time.
Yeah.
Okay.
Interesting, because Romans 9 says that God raised up Pharaoh, the one in the time of Moses, for this purpose.
Yeah.
And so it sounds to me like he's demonstrating that he's faithful. He raises up this Pharaoh for this time, this purpose.
Pharaoh is really from the beginning. It's not like Pharaoh's this great guy and then he slips up by taking the wrong woman and God punishes him. No, he is under the wrath of God. There is no one more proud and arrogant. The man claims to be a god himself. That's what the pharaohs did. He's not just some Egyptian guy. This is Pharaoh. That's why people, when they get upset about God hardening Pharaoh's heart, as if that's sort of like Pharaoh is just this innocent guy. It's like Pharaoh is Pharaoh, for goodness sake. He's the one who claims himself God, demanding people worship. He enslaves a whole nation. The man is he is so arrogant and proud, and when the Lord humbles him in this way and breaks it down, I mean, I think it's shocking when he realizes that just one little guy's wife will bring such devastation in his house. And you see in the story of how the intervention of God is the focus of the story. It's not the actions of Abram and what he does. It's really the actions of God that are the focus of the story. And so that's why I don't like talking about the moral things. Was Abram perfect? No, but whatever. It's not about Abram. It's about God keeping his promises. And look what the Lord restores. The Lord restores everything and more. You'll notice Abram gets his wife back. Abram returns to the land. And
Everything.
he receives all kinds of stuff. Extra blessings, right? All is restored. And there again, God is faithful to his promises. It's a test. And whether it's a test from the devil, which I think the devil is certainly part of it, but I think it's also the Lord. The Lord sets it up that this should happen. If there should be a famine, that he should go there, that he should lose his wife, and then the Lord will bring him out. And Abram first sees now the salvation of the Lord. So, 25 years later, actually more like 40 years later, when he's asked to sacrifice his son, Abraham has been through this test already now. He's been through it so many times where the Lord makes a promise, makes it seem that the promise is impossible to fulfill, and then fulfills it anyway, constantly testing our faith. It's a great story. And it foretells the salvation that he'll provide for Israel and Egypt under Moses, and also the salvation he provides for us, in that he will send his only son, who will bear the plagues and the affliction through judgment to set us free and to give us the land, the blessing, and the family that we've been longing for. So, all right, we'll end it there for now. Any questions before we part? I'm going to try to get a map for us next time that we meet so we can kind of follow along on
That
his
was
journey.
good. That was good.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Break down.
All right. Well, thank you. So we won't meet again next week. Let me just hold on a second. I lost my place here. I got to stop recording. There we go.